Welcome to Daily Armor. Today we're going to be in Isaiah chapter 58, looking at verse number 7. Isaiah 58, looking at verse number 7. Verse number 7 says, "Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house? When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh?" These are some things that the Lord's saying that we need to be able to do. And a lot of times we're not able to do those things until we have first met with Him through private and personal prayer and fasting. Sometimes you've been so hurt. Sometimes you've been dealing with something that's so difficult and so hard that you do have to stop, and you do have to even push aside your normal daily activity and really get along with the Lord. This is not about a show in front of others, and that's what the Lord is dealing with here. They were putting on a show in front of others, and they're missing the whole point of it. It's not a ritual. It's not a little ceremony that you go through and everybody's like pat you on the back. Oh, you did it. No, this is personal. This is private between you and the Lord, that because you know the things that you deal with and that you struggle with, the Lord will bring to light those things that you're trying to avoid or that you're not even, quite aware of, but He will make you aware of those things. And when we come to the Lord, when I have come to the Lord, even down to something as simple as things that I was saying that I didn't realize where I was, and the example that I was giving was a bad example. Technically, there's those that would say there was nothing wrong with what I said. But then when I looked at it from the Lord's point of view, I realized that I was causing a lot of problems, not only for myself, but my husband and for others. And let me share with you what I mean. My husband is also my pastor. It's very difficult sometimes as a pastor's wife to separate the two. He's my pastor. He's my husband. He's my husband. He's my best friend. He's, who I hang out with. He's who I do life with. But then when we're at church, he's my pastor. And He's in charge, and the Lord's given him messages, the Lord's given him direction, and the Lord's given him leadership, decisions and things like that. So as I caught myself, and I didn't used to be real bad about doing this, but as I caught myself in these recent years, and I, as we would be speaking at church, and I would refer to him as Todd, because that's who he is to me. He's my husband. That's what I call him at home. I call him Todd. But just like when I'm at home, and if I'm not careful, when I call him Todd, my granddaughter will call him Todd. She'll say, "Todd," and I'm like, "No, that's your papa. That's your papa." And I have to remember in front of her to call him Papa. And the same goes when I'm at church. When I'm at church, I've got to stop, and I'm really, really actively working on this, and I'll catch myself, and then I'll say pastor, I'll say pastor, So I'm really, really working hard at trying to correct this. But when I'm at church, I need to do that for myself. I need to remember that we're not dealing with home decisions and, what do you want for supper, and, what about, working on the budget and making this decision or that decision, and what makes me feel comfortable and what makes him feel comfortable and all that. When we're at church, it's different. When we're at church, he's my pastor, and he is my spiritual leader. He is the leader of our church. And I need to separate those two in order for me to show him the respect that God has put him in that position. He didn't put himself in that position. He actually didn't want to be a pastor. He was, when the Lord called him to preach, and he submitted to that. And I'll tell you, he did not want to be a preacher. He didn't care for speaking in front of a bunch of people. But that's what the Lord wanted him to do. And as he submitted to that, then he was like, well, hopefully the Lord just used me to fill in here, a little there. And then it was within months literally months, about 6 months. In about 6 months' time, the Lord had him pastoring at Laurel Hill Baptist Church. And I wished I was there tomorrow. A dear sweet lady passed away on Sunday, and her funeral is tomorrow. And I'm so torn because I want to be there. I want to be there so badly. And I can't be in two places at once. Anyway, as I am speaking with him, and this was one of those things that through this Isaiah 58 that the Lord showed me, that there's big things that we deal with, but sometimes it's those tiny little things that we need to stop and we need to deal with and we need to look at and we need to let the Lord bring to light, because when he shines some light on it, it may not look too good at first, but then the end result is going to be a change in an attitude, and then setting a better example. So just like when my granddaughter says something just like that, then I have to do that as well at church. And so that was something that through this Isaiah 58 that the Lord has shown me and has helped me with. And as we are bringing those things to the Lord and dealing with those through personal prayer, through personal fasting, through setting aside that time, through setting aside that time to also submit, then it's going to produce some things. So when the Lord's getting us ready, then there's going to be some actions that's going to follow. And that's what we find here in verse number 7. In verse number 7, it says, "Is it not to deal thy bread to the hungry?" In other words, deal thy bread. Deal means to share, to divide. So are you going to share? And it's talking about thy bread, what you have. Maybe before, we were being selfish, or maybe before we were too angry and too bitter, but the Lord has since broke those yokes, that heavy burden. He's broke that. And now he's saying this is what fasting will produce. You're going to want to share what you have. You're going to want to share Jesus. You're going to share, he is the bread. He is the bread of life. But you're going to want to share what you have. It's going to maybe cost you a personal cost, because we do need to literally share what we have, our food, our, things that the Lord brings into our life. He also expects us to share that with others. Why? Because we're sharing the love of Jesus. And 2, we're saying, Lord, we trust you. You're going to send more. You're going to keep supplying our needs. We don't have to fear helping someone else out. We don't have to fear what we share, because Lord, we know you are our supply. And so we're showing that our trust is in the Lord, and we're also expressing and showing that love of Christ. And this is to the hungry. And it also says, and that thou bring the poor that are cast out to thy house. We're not only that those share those things that you with those that you come in contact with, but it's saying, are you going to bring the poor? Are you going to bring? You're going to take some things. So sometimes you're going to realize there's a need somewhere, and they can't get to you to supply that need, but you need to go to them. So sometimes we got to go out. Sometimes we got to put ourselves out there, and take it to those that cannot come to you. So we have to, it's going to be an action. We're going to be actively sharing the love of God. We're going to be actively doing the work of the Lord. And then in verse number 7, it also says, when thou seest the naked, that thou cover him. When thou seest the naked, that thou cover him. That is protecting somebody. Sometimes we need to be an advocate for others, and sometimes we need to offer them that covering when they're cold, when they don't even realize that they need to be covered, when sometimes they're even refusing it. But we're gonna see, that's that, having those eyes of compassion. When you see somebody and they have a need, if you have it in your ability, feel that need. If it's at all possible, pray and ask the Lord, how would you have me intervene? How would you have me to, what would you have me to do? Maybe you do it anonymously. Maybe they don't even know, because so many times then people will turn to you, and actually they need to learn to turn to the Lord. And so we can have those eyes of compassion. Watch, pay attention. Maybe it's that person that's sitting across. Maybe that's that person at work. Maybe it's your neighbor down the road. And you don't, you don't want to see them suffer, and you have those eyes of compassion. So when you see somebody that's naked and they need some help, we got to have compassion, and through that personal time with the Lord, and when you receive that forgiveness of your own own things that you've done, and you want to extend that to others, because through the breaking of that bondage that God's done for you and God's done for me, we want others to experience that. We want others, and we'll see a need, those eyes of compassion. And it says also here in verse number 7, that they go to the end, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh. I know sometimes, I know that there's some of you, I know there's a friend of mine back home, and she's dealing with a very difficult son, very, very difficult son. He has hurt her tremendously, and in something so personal. He's hurt her tremendously, and he's wanting to come home, and she's like, you can't. And she's not ready. She's not ready to see him. She's not ready to deal with him. He said he was sorry, but he doesn't really, he's not really sorry. And she's got to find it in her heart. She's got to get some help from the Lord, because she's not able right now. But when you spend that time with the Lord is going to get her ready, and she's going to be able. We're praying, I'm praying, that the Lord does a major work in his, and he needs it. He needs a complete turnaround. He needs to know the Lord personally. He's using the Lord against her, but he doesn't know the Lord, and he needs to know the Lord. And so sometimes we want to turn our backs on our own flesh, and that's what that's talking about. It says, and that thou hide not thyself from thine own flesh. And sometimes we want to hide ourselves because we've been hurt, because we don't want to deal with that anymore, because we don't know if this, are they sincere? We don't know. But don't be afraid. I'm not saying get yourself in a bunch of trouble. I'm not saying, go beyond what you're able to do, but just sharing the love. And maybe that your love has to be some tough love. Maybe that you can say, I love you, but I can't, I'm no longer going to help you along your journey of sin and deceit and all this, and I'm no longer going to participate in that. But you do have to have that compassion, and if there's a true need, if they need, a blanket, if they need some bread, if there's something that's a true need there, have eyes of compassion, but then know when we are truly helping, or when we need to even have a little bit of that tough love and say, I love you and I do forgive you, but but we can't, I'm not gonna help you further your sinful behavior. And so that's a difficult one, but that's one that we definitely need to take to the Lord in prayer, and do some fasting, do some separating from our normal routine, and get along with the Lord. And then he is going to enable you by breaking those heavy burdens, that heavy yoke. He's gonna break those things. You're gonna be free from all of that, and that anger and that bitterness and that unforgiveness and all those things that you deal with, that can be broken to where you can help them without being a hindrance, because sometimes helping others is a hindrance. Sometimes helping others isn't really helping. But the Lord will show us the difference, and we can have those eyes of compassion. Maybe you need to just, be in prayer. Maybe you've had a hard time praying for somebody and you need to pray for them. There's been people that's been difficult in my life. There's been situations that I've been hurt, and there's people that's hurt my children, and I've had to ask the Lord, help me with dealing with these people. And he says, you pray for them. You pray for them, and that really does give yourself. The Lord gives you an attitude adjustment during that. And so then I can see that person or be around that person that's hurt me or hurt my child. And that's, some of the most painful things I think I've experienced is those that have hurt my child. But then I've had that attitude of forgiveness and able to have a conversation with them and be concerned about their needs and pray for them. Because ultimately the Lord, vengeance is of the Lord. We don't need to take matters in our own hands, because the Lord is, he's going to take care of all that. He's going to be working on both sides. And that's how that the love of Christ is shown, is working on all sides all together. So thank you for joining me. I look forward to seeing you again soon.